So traditional Zulu music, that's popularly known as Maskandi, has its roots in the deep cultural expression of Kwa Zulu Natal. In South Africa, it's the #1 genre of music, in case you didn't know, but without the instruments to actually play that music, it's actually at risk of extinction. That's where my next guest actually comes in. He's decided to use his life for the preservation of instruments specifically that are used to produce that unique sound. As a start, take a look at this. All right, I think that's a concertina, but Manqobizizwe Ncala, who is our next guest, has actually left a career as a systems engineer, and that was to try and answer his spiritual calling to provide healing to the world through music. He's a teacher, an instrument artisan, and an entrepreneur, and joins us now on this Heritage Day to explain the importance of keeping the music heritage of Maskandi alive. Manqobizizwe, it's great to have you on the program.
Thank you.
With all your goods, thanks very much for coming through. It is called a concertina, right?
This is called a concertina, yes. It's commonly confused with another instrument called an accordion, which is a little bit bigger and manifests itself a lot in traditional Sesotho music.
Right.
Yeah, so this is a concertina, which is more played in the traditional Zulu music.
Got you. All right, let's take a couple of steps back. I mean, I know often we speak about animals and cultures being extinct. Yeah. Not many people speak about an instrument essentially dying out. I mean, help us connect the dots of how you've literally left a career in engineering to try to keep instruments alive.
Yeah, so it really boils down to my transition from that technical space into the music space. I didn't grow up playing instruments or wanting to be a musician. So only when I made the transition into music, I started playing these instruments, and concertina was one of the instruments I picked up first. I'm primarily a guitarist, but the challenges that I would face is that firstly sourcing the instrument, because if you want to play proper Maskandi music, the connoisseurs will tell you that the concertina is a very important element in that music. So also in the way the concertina is set up. So those are the challenges I was facing, and there's literally no resources that I was able to come across to, for example, teach me how to play isiZulu, and also the adjustments that need to be made to the instrument to produce that required sound. So that for me was really where it came from. It was born out of need, because I had issues with my concertina and I didn't have anyone to fix it for me. And that's how I actually got to realizing the necessity of being able to not only play these instruments, but understand them intricately as well for that.
So you had to essentially uncover this from first principles, from empirically, there was no one is necessarily guiding you through putting together a concertina. So was it kanjani ke this is how it's meant to sound if no one's really teaching you what the sound is or how the sound is put together? So
when I listen to Maskandi, a lot of the times I listen and pick up the techniques in how the instrument is played. So amanye abadlali benkostina kukhona mina umuntu engamlalela ngayizwa inkostina iqala kwakuyinyoni emhlophe etshali owaziwa nje esadlalela kakhulu baba uphuze khemisi. He's a very excellent concertina player. There's others as well, the late Babu Skindi Sabesuthu Babu Lahla Umlenze, ney'ntanga zami ke bakhona ke nje oSilver River Mchunu omthweyintombi abadlali benkosini. But as I say, we're so few and far between and spread apart that I literally had to hear or train myself by listening. So when you buy a concertina off the shelf, which is very hard to source, by the way, you still have to customize it anyways. So this particular one that I've got here, this is my personal one that I use as a prototype and I use to do experiments. I've actually deconstructed it here for the purposes of this conversation.
No way.
So this is actually the deconstructed part of it. And this instrument is basically a reed instrument which you need to produce the sound by air.
Right.
Similar to what you'll find with a harmonica. So a concertina uses the same principles, but when it comes to the tuning of the instrument, the sound that you need to produce, as I say, it's not stock standard for Maskandi, so modifications are made. If you look at these holes here, if you look at principles of science and physics, the smaller the hole or the wider the hole produces different air pressure, right. And that gives you a different sound. So ushuna inkosini Maskandi, it's basically taking it apart and changing the tuning reeds, basically filing off the material to get that specific note for the sound you're looking for. Because you cannot just take inkosini and then uzoidlala Maskandi, there'll be clashes.
Right.
So you need to do that modification. And there was nobody, as I say, there to show me, so I had to literally go through that process.
Fascinating.
For myself until I understood it better.
Fascinating. We'll speak about the other instrument in just a moment. I'm told it's called dipila. In what language was it, Chris? Setswana. Sepedi. There you go. A lot of voices in my ear trying to help us guide the discussion. But for you, it's also linked to spirituality in some sense. Take us through that journey.
Okay, so for me, when I speak about the spiritual aspect about it, the conviction to become a musician for me came from a dream or a series of dreams. So it became an exploration of the experiences I was having in these dreams. So as I spoke earlier, I'm primarily a guitarist, and most people know me for ukudlala isging. Isging, the way it's set up, it's heavily customized in terms of the string configuration and the playing technique. And when I get asked about how did you figure that out, I also sometimes have difficulty explaining, because this is something that I would literally experience in my dreams, where you would be shown and somebody would be literally putting your fingers in a fretting position, literally showing you which string to put where. And that's something that you kind of struggle to grasp, and you struggle to discuss when people don't really get it. But what's happened since exploring that spiritual activity for me has been a testament on its own, because I wouldn't have come to a point where I understand these instruments and I build them so intricately had I not explored that element. And I'll add there as well, to say that, those kind of spiritual callings, in my personal view, are often confused being or with a spiritual healer calling. So umuntu mhlambe uzothi mhlambe aphuphe asha bese kuthiwa sekufanele ayothwasa, for example. That's a very common misconception. But when you start to explore, and innately understand what it is that's being required of you, that's when I started to understand my calling to the music and what my contribution literally is required. So yes, I perform, yes, I play sessions, but my passion is in the teaching and preservation of the knowledge that I pick up along the way.
And usually that happens when you get help from abantu who came before you. In fact, many times you'll be told, if you have some kind of gift, it's passed down through generations. I'm not sure if that's been your experience as well. In other words, when you decided to go down this path, how taken aback was your family, if at all?
There was, I think, elements of being taken aback, because at that time I was already working, and I had never in my personal goals said I want to be a musician. I sang in the choir as a child, but that was never out of any conviction. So there was an element of not understanding why this guy is wanting to make a switch. I mean, you're employed, you're working there, you've got a 9 to 5, but no one really understands that conviction within you. I'm the one that's going through the experience. I'm the one that's not able to even focus on what I'm doing anyways, because I'm hearing all of these things, and only when I started to explore. So I think now it's become much better, honestly, because people, abantu bakholwa ngokubona. Umuntu mase bebona ukuthi lo muntu nanga impela ishaya inkosini, nanga impela esishaya isigingci. And when people, for example, like the media, and people actually recognize what you're doing, then I think that for me is testament on its own, So the family, I think, has started to accept for what it is.
You've been vindicated, in other words, vindicated by your life. Let's talk about this instrument as well. It obviously resembles a guitar, but a far cry from it.
So this instrument is a kamalengoni. That is the name of the instrument. It's of West African descent. Kamalengoni means hunter's harp. So in West Africa in ancient times, you know, the people would play this harp to actually mesmerize the animals. So this is actually not really an instrument designed for entertainment and pleasure, but more for hunting purposes. So the young men would go in and play this harp, and the frequencies that this harp would produce would mesmerize the animals. And similar to what you'd see when a deer is stuck in headlights, that phenomenon would be simulated or produced by the frequencies played on the kamalengoni. So the kamalengoni as well in itself is a modification of, most people are familiar with a kora. Kukhona lena shabo Pops Mohammed, that 21 strings. This is only a 12-string instrument, but a 21-string instrument is the concept of the harp. You also have a donsongoni. Donsongoni is a 6-string harp, and as I say, you know, the origins of these instruments were really to produce certain frequencies to induce certain changes in the environment. So as a person who's interested in stringed instruments, I personally underwent, through the assistance of organizations like Music in Africa, the gentleman who taught me to build this instrument is Mr. Joe Makanza, who's an instrument player himself. I personally wanted to learn to build this because of my personal goals and objectives with the instrument. Kufuna ukuyithatha ikamalengoni ngiyimodify, ngiyifake iy'ntambo lezi engidlala ngazo mina ushuni wami esiginqini kamavalabuzo, ngizoshaya umaskandi ngekamalengoni. But also, like I say, the understanding of the entirety is quite important, because if you're going to apply it in that context, you need to obviously build it in such a way that it will manifest for the goals that you're seeking to achieve. Yeah.
I could listen to you till the cows come home, but I'm more interested, as a parting shot, to get your take on what you think the message ought to be specifically to young people on this Heritage Day around what you're interested in specifically. In a couple of seconds, young people watching, inspired, moved, whatever the case may be, what do you reckon ought to be their take-home from our discussion?
So the first thing for me would be to say that the concept of heritage is not confined to a day. So heritage is a characteristic of life. That's something that you should understand, that heritage is not something that's dictated to you or something that you should only be cognizant of on a specific day or on a prescribed period. That's the first thing. And secondly, in the context of music, you know, I think as a living testament, I always use my own story to say I'm a living testament that performance is not the panacea in the industry. For example, as a guitarist, you know, when your guitar needs to be set up, or when your guitar needs to be tuned, or when you need to do a action adjustment, all of that kind of thing is something that can still allow a young person to manifest themselves and add value in the industry. We're not all called for that, and I think people need to understand their role within the industry. We can't all be musicians and want to perform. We need to understand where else we can. Because and that's the truth. But you know, my message is to encourage them to find other areas within their area of passion where they can excel and maybe add more value.
And value is what you've definitely added to our program. Thank you so much for coming through. I really do appreciate your time as well. Manqobizizwe Ncala is an artist. You've heard that he's an instrument artisan, an entrepreneur, and a teacher as well. Once again, really do appreciate your coming through.